I wonder what Christmas means to you. For me, it's kind of an exciting combination of, on the one hand, great joy at the anticipation of seeing family. Beth, my wife, and I have together 16 siblings and partners of siblings and 17 nieces and nephews. So that's quite an exciting thing to look forward to. And then the reality of complete chaos, which results when you put that many people with a shared history who know just what buttons to press to wind each other up in a confined space for 48 hours. And I was thinking about this a couple of years ago because we were walking back. I'd gone back for Christmas to my hometown, and I was born and bred in a beautiful little town just north of London called Luton. And I love my hometown of Luton, but it doesn't ever seem to appear on any Christmas cards. And we were walking back from church through the snow on a day not unlike today, and we got back to our house and a beautiful scene awaited us. We'd peered through the windows, the table was laid for Christmas lunch, the turkey was crisping nicely in the oven, there was a pile of presents wrapped under the Christmas tree. And actually all the scene needed was us. But as we went to the front door, we realized to our concern that we couldn't actually get in the house. We each tried each of our keys. That didn't work. We tried to mess around with a handle. That didn't work. And it turned out that the last person out of the house had managed to lock the door in such a way that it was impossible to get back into the house. And some of you are thinking, well, how is that even possible? And trust me, that's a question we asked each other with increasing agitation as the minutes went on. But basically, we needed to break into our own house. So naturally, we turned first to my little brother, Paul. And slightly because of his misspent youth, he's quite good at gaining access to premises without the owner's express permission. And so he was off scurrying up the side of the house and trying to force the windows at the top. He tried to jimmy the locks. I was actually quite impressed at the skill set he'd developed. But it was all to no avail. He couldn't get in. And by this stage, people were leaving their own Christmas lunches and coming out of their houses to watch this scene unfold and stare open-mouthed at my family standing outside our house, which was actually very helpful of them. And then I suddenly had the brainwave. I thought, a stroke of genius. I looked down and saw my youngest, smallest nephew there. And I thought, what about if I just tried to push him through the letterbox? And I got him halfway through, and then I realized he's not quite as small as he looks. And so he was slightly stuck half in, half out. And so the only option we had then was to get a hacksaw, not for him, but to try and... We actually ended up sawing through our own front door. It was complete and utter chaos. But in some ways, it was a little bit like what Christmas can seem like. You come past it once a year, you peer in at the Christmas story through the windows, and it might look beautiful, it might look moving, you might be curious about it. But then you feel, well, how do I access it? Do I have a place in that? How would I get in to it? And does it have any relevance to my life in London in 2017? The angel says to the shepherds that the birth of Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah, is good news of great joy for all the people. And all the people includes me, and it includes you. But it doesn't always seem like that. Can it really be good news for me? How can something which happened 2,000 years ago, 2,000 miles away, the birth of a baby in a random corner of the Middle East, be good news for me? What can it have to do with my life now? Because my life is complex. You might be thinking, maybe your job is complex. Maybe the people you work with, your colleagues, are complex. Maybe you have a very difficult boss. Maybe you are a difficult boss. And our relationships can be complex. They can be messy. They're not always straightforward, whether it's home or family. We can have so many questions. What's my value? What's my purpose? How do I know that if I achieve all I've set my sights upon, all I aim for, that I'll be truly satisfied? I don't want to get to the top of the ladder and find there's nothing there. What about my identity? Am I just the aggregate of what my friends, my colleagues, my family think of me? And actually, could I ever be truly loved? Because I'm sure there's some parts of me which are lovable, and we often push those to the front. But then there are other parts which we think if people really knew about, they wouldn't be able to love us. But the angel says it's for all people, and that includes me, that includes you, in all of our complexity, with all of our confidence, all of our insecurity, all of our hopes, all of our fears. So it's fascinating to see who's actually there, who's actually in the stable, because I always assume the nativity is basically a lot of very holy people with glowing faces gathered around a crib. But the reality is actually surprising. It's more complex, it's messy. I mean, imagine being Mary, having to go up to your parents, a young woman in that culture, unmarried, going up to your parents and saying, Mum, Dad, I've got some news. I'm pregnant. No, it's not Joseph's. But it's fine, honestly. It's all part of God's plan to save the world. That's a complicated conversation to have. Imagine Joseph trusting, hoping that it's good news that your fiancée is pregnant and it's not your baby. Jesus being born in a stable, in the muck and the mess, in an animal's feeding trough. And then the shepherds. The shepherds were considered the lowest of the low. They were looked down on. They were the rough and the ready outsiders. And it's to them, of all people, that God sends an angel to announce the birth of a saviour. Not to a king in a castle or a politician in a parliament, but to shepherds in the midst of their sheep. And actually, life as a shepherd in those times was difficult. It was messy. It was complex. I actually know quite a bit about what it means to be a shepherd. When I was 8 years old, I played a shepherd in a school nativity play. There were 3 shepherds. I was the second shepherd. And the way the play went, the first, we came to visit the baby Jesus, and we brought with us 3 gifts. Now, the astute among you are saying, isn't that the wise men? But, my school was in Luton, what can you do? So the first shepherd brought a sheep, which, as you will probably know, is a very valuable present, very good present to bring. Completely useless for a baby, but there we are. And then I was the second shepherd, and I had to come and bow down next to the baby Jesus, and I had to take off my cloak and give the baby Jesus the gift of my cloak to keep him warm. And then the third shepherd came in, and actually he hadn't brought anything, but he just said, I don't have anything to give you, but I give you my heart. And that's a pretty good line, actually. That's a pretty good line. So on the big night, we all came in, and the first shepherd came and handed over his sheep to the baby Jesus, and then I came in and then was just about to hand over, and then I suddenly realized to my horror that in all the excitement of the opening night, I'd left my cloak off stage, and there I was in front of everyone without anything to give the baby Jesus. And I looked at the baby Jesus, I looked at the audience, I looked at the third shepherd, I looked back towards the baby Jesus, and I said, I have nothing to give you, but I give you my heart. The look of hurt and betrayal on the face of the third shepherd. And he kind of stormed forward and said, I have nothing to give you, but I give you my heart. I hope by now he's forgiven me. But it's funny, isn't it? Because we often think about Christmas as being about giving and receiving gifts. And Jesus said it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. But I sometimes think because of the way we're brought up, because of our childhoods maybe, we have a slightly skewed idea of what it means when you give and receive a gift. I don't know if you had the same experience that I had when you were a child of going along to Santa's grotto. And you kind of go in and you sit there next to Santa. And what you really want is a present. But first you have to suffer the ordeal of kind of being cross-examined about your life choices. So Santa kind of looks you in the eye and says, have you been a good boy this year? And there's the honest answer to that question, but you really do want a present. So slightly nervously you say, yes. And then you look to your mum for support. And she also knows the truth, but she wants to be encouraging and supportive, so she kind of smiles and nods. And then your little brother is standing next to her, and he also knows the truth and feels no need to be encouraging at all. And so arms folded, shaking his head, horrified at the charade that's kind of unfolding in front of him. And so you kind of feel slightly guilty about the whole experience. And to be honest, if I had a chance, I wish I'd had the presence of mind then. I wish I could go back now. And when I was asked that question by Santa, have you been a good boy this year? I would say, no, I haven't. But let's be honest, Santa, neither have you. It's hard being good. Life is difficult. It's complex. It's hard to be good for 5 minutes, even if you try really hard. Let alone being good for a whole day, 365 days a year. You know, it's a really difficult thing to do. And even if I could be a goody two-shoes for that long, Santa, I'm not sure that is what I was ultimately made for. I felt like I was made for more than mere morality. And while we're at it, Santa, if Christmas is about anything, it's about grace. And grace is about an undeserved gift, an undeserved present. So actually, Santa, it doesn't really matter if I've been good or bad. All that matters is that I'm willing to receive the gift that is offered me. And on balance, I am. So please stop asking your stupid questions and give me my present. Because Christmas doesn't mean you can have a present if you've been perfect, if you deserve it. That's not good news. That's just news. And for me, to be honest, most of the time, it's bad news. You don't give gifts because people have never made a mistake, never had a failure, have got perfect records. You give gifts to people because you love them. And that's why the angels say it's good news. Because in the midst of the mess, with all the things we get wrong, God has given Jesus for us. For me, for you. Not because we deserve it, but because we're loved. Jesus knows you. All of the good, all of the bad. All of the hopes, all of the fears. All of the successes, all of the failures. All that you're proud of and pushed to the front. All that you're ashamed of and try and bury. He knows you to the bottom of your soul, and yet he loves you to the sky. And Jesus means Savior. And if our greatest need actually was some form of negotiated political situation in a complex post-referendum context, to pick an entirely random example, Jesus would have sent a politician. If our greatest need was more money, he would have sent a banker. If it was better entertainment, he would have sent an entertainer. But because our greatest need was total forgiveness, he sent a Savior. Jesus is a Savior, and he came to save. And he gave himself for us. And gifts are free, but they're not free to the giver. And that's what makes them significant, actually. And because of his love for you, Jesus died for me, for you, bore all my sin on his shoulders, paid the price to reconcile me to God. And Jesus came wrapped. It says in the passage we heard so beautifully read, Jesus was wrapped and placed in a manger. And the only other time Luke, in his account of Jesus' life, uses that description of being wrapped is when Jesus, having given his life, is taken from the cross and wrapped and placed in a tomb. And 3 days later, he rose again. And that's actually what makes me so excited about this. Not just that Jesus is a powerful example of sacrificial love, but that it's true. He really did come. He really did die. He really did rise. The evidence for the resurrection is so powerful. I actually worked as a criminal defense barrister for 7 years. And every day for years, I looked at the evidence about the events in question, assessing it, weighing it. And over those 7 years, I represented tens, hundreds, probably over 1,000 people who are accused of criminal offences. It's great to see so many of you here tonight. And But when I look at the evidence about Jesus' resurrection, I find it compelling. It compels me to believe. It gives me confidence that my sin is paid for, that my fear is cast out by his perfect love, that his rising gives me a hope stronger than death. And that's what I found. Jesus gives me deep peace in the midst of the storms of life. He gives me a joy which is resilient in the face of suffering. A love which brings purpose to every day of my life. And that's what I see. I've seen in my Alpha group this term. As people start to encounter the risen Jesus, they experience new peace, new love, new joy. And what's fascinating about this scene is, I don't know about you, but I tend to self-exclude. I think, oh, this can't be for me. This must be for those kind of shiny, very holy people who've never made a mistake, never put a foot wrong, have it all together. But in the stable, we see a bunch of very normal people who haven't been good all year, who need a savior just as much as I do, gathered around a central figure of grace, Jesus. And you are invited to that. You're invited. You're known. You're loved. And when you see that, when you experience that, it gives you a deep, unmistakable, life-changing joy. That's what we see here. Mary, who treasures it in her heart. The shepherds who started that night thinking it would be just like any other night in their lives, encounter Jesus and come away overflowing with joy at what they've seen and heard. And that's what everyone who encounters Jesus experiences. They find life, and life in all its fullness. Because there's great joy, there's great peace to be truly known and truly loved. When you realize the good news is not just that a Savior has come, but that my Savior has come. You find in the midst of chaos, new hope. In the midst of trouble, perfect peace. In the midst of confusion, new purpose. Why? Because Jesus is good news of great joy for all people. For me and for you. Amen.